It has been a brief hiatus, 10 days. No devlog since 24th July. Now, a couple of changes have been made in the last 10 days, mostly on 2 days, spread over the last 10 days. One is the fact that there have been a few changes on the server rendered C server that has brought things down to a fairly significant low, 200 to 300 milliseconds on average. The page size itself is around 2.8 KB at this moment. It's completely rendered on the server. So that's one major change. And the second thing, which is a significant improvement, is not a user facing one, but more towards the system that powers everything. Now, when things were running earlier, probably before 24th, there is some interesting observation that I made about CPU hitting 100%, being used 100% of the time, right? So that, if you look at the graph, has significantly taken a dip, right? So from 100%, it's come down all the way till 30, 40%. And it's been the consistent. So there are a couple of spikes if you can look towards the last few days. One of it is a temporary change with respect to that is today, as a matter of fact. I fumbled up. I compiled an experimental change to the system. I did an MV on the wrong binary and ended up going back to the 100%. So it took a few hours to figure out what I was doing because it is fairly early in the morning. I couldn't really care to do much at that point in time, perhaps. But that aside, there was one spike which was a system update that was going on that spiked for a very fairly like sliver of a bit. But besides that, it has been consistently using only around 40% of the CPU at this point in time. What has changed here is from a threaded model, system has completely moved into a libev model, which is basically an event-driven model. Now, I would probably not at this point in time delve into the details of it because I'm still working on some experimental changes to see if I can sort of expand out horizontally in the same machine for further categories and regions. Right. Once that is solidified in some sense, I'll probably come back with another devlog on it. But if I look at it, this system today, where it started off was around 6 to 7 region category combinations. Today it is running 19. So if I were to take a look at the website, so we have introduced Middle East. Middle East was, as a matter of fact, already there. Japan has been introduced recently in the last few weeks, the week rather, and global has already been there. And this is about 19 containers. And when I say container, this warrants some kind of a clarity. It is not a Docker container. I have named my bash script, which is the runner, as a container because it's a contained unit that runs the entirety of the process, right? So I have 19 of these processes running in parallel, and periodically there are content extraction scripts that run. There is a web server that runs. There is a ping server that runs for my beacon calls, and there is also a minor log manager slash audit server, right? That I also have on the server. Right? So those are probably not as much heavy as the rest of the ones, but it's entirely around 20 to 25 processes running every second. And if I look granularly even further, the puller containers, as I call them, they complete within a second, or even granularly speaking, it is 3 to 4 times a second, right? And I've naturally introduced some kind of a delay to keep the system in the state where that it is today. But be that as it may, the load has significantly increased in that sense, but the system has maintained much, much more performance and sustained it over the period. This is not a direct user-facing, you know, uh, improvement in that sense of it, but there is a little bit of a contribution from this towards the user-facing aspect of it. Right? Now, my server is taking data from the SQL database, rendering, constructing the HTML template, and then throwing it back in. Since it runs on the same machine and the SQLite has to be created at the same time and all those things. I mean, To be very honest, the traffic is not as much as this point in time. So the moment it moves to higher traffic, I would probably break it out and move it into a different database or some kind of a shared volume of sorts. I'm experimenting around that point at this point in time, around that in this point in time. But going back to the point that I was making, the horizontally scaled number of processors increasing also adds load on the machine as it tries to render the template on the fly. It's not a templating engine, Jinja, none of those things. It's handwritten templates. It's constructed as well. If you look at it, it's super old school in taking a base template and then concatenating things on. Right? It is not dynamic because this page does not warrant any dynamism in the entire system. So it works for this current situation. And for the most part, a lot of the static content generators do a very minimal amount of logic on those things. And if we take a step back and look at how the MVC framework is designed, views were supposed to be as dumb as possible. The controller routing things, the model doing 99.999% of the heavy lifting, and then dumping the data into the template or the view layer, where its only job is to render content and nothing more. There's zero logic. But from the point probably when the JavaScript frameworks sort of took over, the ability and the flexibility was sort of became second nature. Agreement, disagreements left aside. So going back again, the point was the performance has not taken a hit. If I look at the web devs course, as a matter of fact, I can run it again once. So it's a live run at the moment. Let us see how it performs, right? Takes a bit of time. Not an indication of the site's agility itself. So if you look at it on mobile, pretty much everything is hard. If you look at your browser, it is the same thing. It's only a web interface to the Lighthouse. If you look at it, the first contentful paint is zero point 0.2 seconds, largest contentful paint is zero point 0.3, speed index is high, fairly high, right? So this is one thing that I'm still figuring my way around. Well, I mean, unsure of what exactly I could do to, save on this the request latency here. But besides that, pretty much the page is top notch, if I may say it myself. And if I'm doing this, right, I'm doing a empty cache and a hard reload, Command Shift R, right? You really don't have a lot of, see, it's 300 odd milliseconds and the page is 200, I mean, 2.8 KB in size, right? Yeah, it would increase when we bring in images into the page naturally. Now that is a different problem to tackle. And ideally, also speaking, it should come with a placeholder image, a base 64 encoded one, which does not increase the size of the page significantly beyond like 4 or 5 KB. The reason is that there was a very interesting video I stumbled upon today while we recorded, published a few hours back by Primogen. There was a 14 KB TCP uh, limit, right? The faster your pages ought to be, the smaller they ought to be, naturally speaking. Now, 14 KB is significantly constrictive if you look at the current state of things, where a framework in itself brings in around 40-50 KB GZIP. Now, this page is like one-fifth of that, right? This works well in this point in time where most of it is quasi-static data. When we go on to the point of having either dynamic content being injected or some kind of JavaScript interaction that has to come through to the page, it might increase just a bit or maybe more. We don't really know at this point in time because it's an unknown beast. Second thing is the images. And images being optimized is an entirely different beast in itself, right? You could probably do a placeholder image and have it as small as possible, and then post facto load the images. That's one, right? Put in a data attribute, an image attribute or something of that sort, and then post facto via JavaScript load the page, load the images. Now there will be thrashing, layout thrashing there, which is a UX jank. How do we handle that? Or do we say that you know what, we don't want to do that, but we would keep this page as it is, which is not a great design per se. So it's a trade-off for a different day. But that said, as it stands, I just wanted to make a quick publish update on the changes that have been made in the last week, right? And there has been some minor changes that I did for the article parser, which is the content extractor itself, sort of in a beta at the moment. Now, very interestingly, when Crisp started in 2014-15, and when we started figuring out the point about bringing content, the JavaScript content extractor used to be between 30 to 40 seconds, right? Now I get a throughput of around 100 URLs being parsed in 2 seconds. Due the That's exactly where it is today. There, the heuristics are a little bit of a concern that is still under exploration. And I did have uh, an experimental build that I was working on yesterday. Now, the tricky part there is how do you balance out for heuristics as a speed, right? The very clean content that you try to extract out of it, you either have to start figuring out ways to uniquely identify patterns and then bring it in for each domain, each kind of content writer and all those things. Or you say, you know what, that doesn't really matter. My entire focus is the pace at which it delivers, at which point your quality takes a hit. And that's a very nuanced balance there. We also had generic extractors and specific extractors while we were running Crisp long back. But at this point in time, I would rather not invest in generic and specific and all those things, but have a fairly solid one that runs for 95% of the cases. Yes, there is a very clear diminishing marginal utility after a certain point and it plateaus out, but that question is still unanswered. So, on that note, sayonara.